Hi everyone, my name is Monique, and today I'm going to be showing you how to play a game that is currently on Kickstarter called The Old King's Crown. In The Old King's Crown, the king has gone missing, so it is up to the leaders of the kingdom's 4 factions to gain enough influence to claim the throne. Players will need to manage their faction's deck of cards to claim locations in the kingdom's various regions and prove that they are worthy to lead. This game plays 1 to 4 players with a dedicated solo mode, and it's both designed and fully illustrated by Pablo Clark and published by Eerie Idol Games, who are helping sponsor this video. And so today, I'm going to be giving you a general overview of how the game is played, but please keep in mind that everything that you see here is considered a prototype copy of the game, which means things are subject to change in the future. For more information regarding the game as well as the campaign, I've included a link to their campaign in the description below. Last but not least, if you enjoy content like this and would like to see more in the future, please consider subscribing. And with that, we are ready to begin. So if you'd please direct your attention to the center of the table, we are all set up here for a 4-player game of The Old King's Crown. Welcome to the kingdom. Now I know that there's a lot going on here, so just to kind of show you around, the kingdom board is comprised of 3 different regions, and each region contains 2 locations. Over the course of the game, players are going to try to earn influence by playing their cards to these various regions and participating in clashes. Now, in addition to the kingdom board, we also have the Great Road down here, which houses the various kingdom cards that we can acquire. And up here, we have additional areas, such as the court, which can help us gain more influence, the turn order track, as well as each faction's specific sites of power. Now, in this game, there are 4 different asymmetric factions. We have the blue, Nobility, the red, Uprising, the purple, the Gathering, as well as the green, Clans. During setup, players will choose to play as one of these 4 factions and take their corresponding player board as well as their faction-specific deck. And you'll only place the sites of power corresponding to the factions who are in play. Now in this game, the king has gone missing. We don't know if he's alive, but he's definitely not here. And so as a leader of one of these 4 factions, your goal is to be the first to score 15 influence, 20 influence in a 2-player game. Now before we discuss the game's round structure, let's just take a look at the resources that a player's faction will have at their disposal. Each player's faction deck is comprised of 2 main types of cards. There are supporters that have a strength value at the top left-hand corner, as well as strategy cards, both of which contain a various number of keywords, which will be interacting with each other throughout the game. Each player also has their own set of 4 unique tactics, depending on their faction, which they'll be able to activate as well as reactivate throughout the game. And so the game is played over the course of several rounds, each representing 1 year, and each round is divided into 4 phases. The first phase represents spring, and during this phase, in turn order, players will be required to place out their herald onto one of the 6 different locations on the board. Thematically, your faction's herald is meant as a tool to sort of intimidate or misdirect other factions. But mechanically, later on in the round, we're going to participate in clashes to control these 3 different regions. And heralds can both gain additional influence as well as steal influence from other players for winning this location. And after placing out my herald, as the active player, I can now take any number of spring actions. Now in this game, you'll see actions written on a variety of places. You'll see them on your faction cards, on your faction board, on your asymmetric tactics, on your kingdom cards that you'll be acquiring throughout the game, and also in the court. Each action tells you which season they activate in, and they're typically optional, unless they say must, in which case those actions are mandatory. And once I've taken my spring actions, then I would pass the active player marker to the next player in turn order, which would be the red player, who would then place out their herald and take any of their spring actions. Once everyone's finished their turn, then we move into summer, where players will simultaneously play cards from their hand face down into each of the different regions. Now each player starts the game with a hand of 6 cards, which is their starting hand limit, which by the way will change throughout the game. And during this phase, players are required to simultaneously play a card face down to each of these 3 regions. And optionally, players may also play a card to the Great Road. This is where a large portion of the strategy will take place, because in the next phase, these cards will be revealed and players will participate in clashes in each region. And once all players have placed their cards, then in turn order, players will again take turns taking summer actions. Now, one type of summer action that is available to all 4 factions is the ability to put out a faction's company supply. Each player has 5 company tokens available to them, and placing out a company token gives the player an additional strength when resolving a region. Now, unlike heralds, company tokens affect the entire region, so they're placed in the middle rather than just in one location. Now, at the end of each round, company tokens do not go back to a player's faction board. They actually go back into the supply. And in order to gain your tokens back, you'll need to place one of your revealed cards into the lost pile, which will not return to your discard pile and into your deck throughout the game. Which means you're essentially taking a card out of play for each company token you wish to return. Now, as the blue player, one of my tactics is Ambush, which I can activate during the summertime. If I take this action, it says I can choose an opponent and swap the positions of 2 of their unrevealed cards, which could be very useful later on in the game when I sort of have feelings about where people are placing their cards. But just a note about tactics. Whenever you choose to activate one, you have to flip it over to its opposite side, which will require you to reactivate it if you'd like to use it again in the future. The cost to reactivate it is on the token itself, and so in the case of my ambush, I can spend 2 influence during spring to reflip my tactics token. Alternatively, I can spend a certain amount of quest cards, which we'll be discussing later. And once I've taken all of my summer actions, then play continues to the next active player, which again would be red. And by the way, turn order is random at the start of the game and will not change until the start of the next round. And once everyone's taken their actions, then we move on to Autumn, where we'll reveal all of the face-down cards and resolve clashes in each of the regions. Now at the start of this phase, the player who's last in turn order gets these 3 resolution markers to place out, which means they get to decide the order in which you'll resolve the 3 regions. So starting with the first region, players flip over all the faction cards assigned to that region and a clash begins. When resolving a clash, the first thing that you consider are all of the cards' keywords. Now, some of these keywords are not applicable to the current situation, so I'll just be discussing the ones that are going to affect this current clash. Now, the goal of each clash is to be the faction at this region who has the highest total strength. Your strength is calculated by the number on your played card, plus any companies that you have in that location, and any other cards that affect the current clash. Now, some cards in the game, when played, will be defensive, and some will be more offensive. Now, in the case of the red player's card, the Night Carnival, it has 2 different keywords, Vulnerable as well as Eliminate X. The Eliminate keyword allows you to remove an opponent's card from the clash into the lost pile, essentially taking it out of the game. And specifically, the Eliminate X keyword allows you to remove 1 card per opponent that's in that clash, so it is quite strong. Now I just want to note that there is 1 card of this type in each player's faction deck. Red just happens to be playing it very early. However, this card also has a weakness, and it is the Vulnerable keyword. Cards that are vulnerable are actually eliminated if a card with that specific trait, which is the Shield, is also played in the same clash. And this happens before the Eliminate comes into play, which is bad news for the red player, because instead of eliminating other players' cards, their card will get eliminated to the lost pile. Blue, on the other hand, played their strongest card. This is their heir, Titus of Dawns and Dusks. This card has 2 different keywords. It has Loyal, which will come into play later, as well as Resilient, which means had this card been eliminated, instead of going to the lost pile, it'll actually get sent to a player's discard pile. And even though green played a 0, their Bright Caravans card has a keyword that says Bolster with a value of 3. Which means for the rest of this round, this card is going to provide an additional 3 strength to the 2 adjacent regions, which made it very important for the green player to choose this region to resolve first. And once you've resolved all of the relevant keywords, then you move on to the strength step, where you essentially calculate the strength of each participating faction. Again, you'll add the value of their faction card to the number of companies in that region, as well as any other cards or tactics that might come into play during this season. In the case of this region, the blue player would win, because they have a total strength of 10 plus 1 company, which is 11, to the other player's 1 and 0. And in the case of a tie, the tied players would participate in a new separate clash by playing an additional card from their hand until either someone has won or the tie is just unresolved. And the player who won would now get to claim the location awards of one of the 2 locations in that region. And so if the blue player chose the Harvest Field, they would not only gain the 2 influence for the location reward, but they would also get an additional influence because their Herald is at this location, and they would get to steal an influence from the red player because the red player's Herald is here as well. Now when claiming rewards, you don't have to choose the location where your Herald is. Alternatively, the blue player can choose the battlefield, which will either allow them to remove remove 2 influence from a single player or claim the Collaborator token. The Collaborator token unlocks a player's special action on their player board for a maximum of up to 3 rounds. In the case of the blue player, they have the Tax Collector, which says each spring you can gain 1 influence, and it adds +3 strength to any of your journeying and occupying cards this round. Now each time you take your action, you rotate the token so that it's sort of a countdown of sorts, and once you've used it 3 times, then it gets returned to the battlefield, unless another player wins the battlefield in which they take the token from you regardless of how many times you've been able to activate it. Then you move on to the next clash. Here, the blue player played their Scouts Report, which says when revealed, they choose one of the following. Either you can reinforce a location with another card from your hand, or you can choose to retreat. Now, the green player played their Nixing Knife, which has that Eliminate X keyword on it, similar to the red player's card in the previous clash. In order to avoid being eliminated, the blue player chooses to retreat, returning this card to their hand. In addition, when triggering the Retreat keyword, you can choose to remove your Herald and any of your accompanies from unresolved regions. Now, even though the green player's card also has the Vulnerable keyword, none of the cards here showed a Shield trait, which means they are going to get to eliminate 1 card from each opponent in this clash. The purple player's very high valued card has the keyword Resilient, which means instead of eliminating this card to the lost pile, it's going to go to their discard pile. And finally, the red player played their Ruse. Each player has 1 copy of their Ruse card, and it's essentially going to stay in your hand for the duration of the game. The Ruse card is sort of a distraction because it always has a strength of 0, and it cannot be moved to the lost or a discard pile. It's always going to stay in a player's hand, which means the red player's card does not get eliminated. So then, green would win this clash because they have a total strength of 9. 5 from their card, 1 from their company, and 3 from their bolster effect of this card. And they can choose to either claim the Shrine, which gains them 1 influence and allows them to place up to 3 cards in any order on the bottom of their draw pile, as well as steal 1 influence from purple. Or they can claim the Necropolis, which gains them 1 influence and allows them to shuffle the discard pile and draw up to 3 cards into their hand. And then you can discard up to 3 cards from your hand. And finally, we have the topmost region, which is called the Highlands, which gives us access to both the court as well as our sites of power. Here, none of the card keywords are actually relevant for resolving this particular clash. So we're going to go straight to tallying up each of their strengths. Here, none of the players played any of their companies, so the red as well as the purple player have a total strength of 0 each. The green player has a strength of 6 because of the additional 3 from their bolster effect, and the blue player has a strength of 8. Although, each player has their own copy of their own faction-specific decree card, which is resolved right after the strength step. And so in the case of the purple's decree card, their card is Ritual Sacrifice, which says during autumn, their strength is 0. However, if you lost in every region, you steal 1 influence from an opponent and move 1 of your cards with the quest keyword from anywhere to your site of power. So then before the blue player even gets to take their rewards, the purple player gets to steal an influence from them and place 1 of their revealed cards that have the quest keyword into their site of power, which in this case is this card that says Quest 1. And it gets placed directly onto their own faction-specific site. A player's site of power can be used in 2 different ways. You can choose to either discard cards from here to either reactivate 1 of your tactics cards, or to gain access to really powerful faction-specific cards that are placed here at the start of the game. But cards can only be placed here by either activating an action that allows you to do so, or by claiming the Wilderness location reward that allows you to gain 1 influence and move 1 card with the quest keyword to your site of power. So, since the blue player won this clash, and their card has the quest keyword with the value of 2, they can choose to claim the Wilderness award, placing their card into their site of power, or alternatively, their card also has the keyword Authority, which allows them to move their card into the court by claiming the Castle location reward. And the significance of this location is that each spring, whoever owns the card that's here gains influence equal to its authority value. Now, there are other keywords in the game that will play a strong role when it comes to strategizing, including the Fortify keyword that'll allow you to place the card on a specific location, blocking all players from claiming rewards there. And there's the Deploy keyword, which is resolved in the next season, which is Winter. During this phase, players resolve any cards played to the Great Road. After resolving any keywords that allow you to either reinforce or to retreat your cards, starting with the player with the highest strength, each player can claim a reward. Now at the Great Road, you have 3 options. You can choose to take a kingdom card, which grants you a new action, placing it in one of your 2 available kingdom card slots on your player board. And when doing so, the card that you played to the Great Road must now be assigned to the kingdom card, occupying it. This essentially takes the card out of your deck. Alternatively, if you already had a kingdom card on your board, you can choose to consolidate it by essentially replacing the occupying card with a new one from your hand. You may want to do this if this is a strong card that you would like to play again in the future. Or if one of your opponents has a kingdom card that you really want, you can choose to steal it. But in order to do so, your journeying card, which is the card that you played to the Great Road, must have a higher strength than the card that is occupying their kingdom card. And again, all players who have played a card to the Great Road will have the opportunity to claim a reward here. And just a note about the kingdom cards, there are a wide variety of kingdom cards in the game, and there are even more so in the box because each game you only play with a deck of 20 of these cards, which means you'll see a different variety of them come out from game to game. And after resolving the Great Road, then again in turn order, players may now take winter actions. Now one winter action that all players have access to is the deploy action. This action allows players to play a card from their hand with the deploy keyword and place it face up to any of the 3 regions turned 90 degrees. In future rounds, before resolving any clashes at that particular region, players who have any deployed cards there will have the option of revealing it, adding it to that clash. It sort of serves as both a setup as well as a threat for any future clashes. Then once all players have resolved their winter actions, you move on to end of year steps. At this point, all players take back their heralds and move all placed companies to a reserve. Players can then choose to retire any of their revealed cards, placing them in the lost pile, not their discard. And for each card they choose to retire, they take back one of their company tokens. The rest of the cards are moved to a player's discard pile, except for any cards that have the loyal keyword, which get returned to your hand. At this point, you would then check to see if anyone has won the game. If not, then you'd move on to the next round, starting with the start of year steps. At the start of each round, players draw back up to their hand size, and if they can't because there aren't enough cards in their deck, then they must decrease their hand size by 1. And finally, before moving into spring, you always reorder the turn order track according to who has the most influence, with the player with the most influence going first and the player with the fewest influence going last. And if by the end of a round, a player has accrued at least 15 influence or 20 influence in a 2-player game, then the game ends and that player wins. And if multiple players have reached that threshold, then whoever has the most influence wins. And that is essentially how you play the Old King's Crown. Now again, I wasn't able to fully deep dive into all of the different types of actions as well as strategies that come into play in the game, and so for more information regarding the game, I encourage you to check out their Kickstarter, which is linked in the description below. Otherwise, if you have any questions about anything that you saw here, please feel free to leave me a comment down below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope it was helpful. If you enjoy content like this and would like to see more in the future, please consider subscribing. Thank you! Bye!